So good afternoon. My name is Jasmine McNealy. I'm an assistant professor in the Public Communication School at Syracuse University. And I tell you that because it'll basically set out why I'm interested in the topic that I'm presenting on today. So talking about the right to be forgotten versus the right to know. The right to be forgotten not actually existing in the United States or recognized in the United States at this time, but there have been some recent activity in the courts which indicate that people are attempting to assert a privilege like the right to be forgotten. Let me just tell you a little bit about myself. I did receive a PhD in mass communication and a law degree. And before that, I got my undergraduate in journalism. So I am predisposed to be interested in issues related to journalism, news gathering, and the publication of information. So one of the ways I keep track and stay abreast of the field is through RSS feeds. One of which I track a lot is Tech Dirt. If you've ever been on the blog Tech Dirt, it has some interesting stories dealing with technology, new media, censorship. And about a year and a half ago, I encountered a story dealing with Harvey Pertz. Now, Harvey Pertz, you'd never know who Harvey Pertz was. Basically, in your day-to-day life, Harvey Pertz probably wouldn't matter unless he was related to you. You just wouldn't know about him. So why is Harvey Pertz important? Well, Harvey Pertz sued the editor of the Cal Daily, editor-in-chief of the Cal Daily, which is the student newspaper at UC Berkeley. And he sued in small claims court. No big deal, right? He only sued for $7,500, which is not a lot of money. I mean, from a certain standpoint, it's not a lot of money. I know for law students and undergrads, that's a lot of top ramen, but $7,500 really isn't a lot of money. Who cares? Small claims court. The interesting thing is what he sued about. See, Harvey Pertz was the father of Chris Pertz, who was at one time a member of the UC Berkeley football team. While he was a 21-year-old senior on the football team, he got in trouble. Supposedly, he had a fight at a strip club, got thrown out, and he was suspended from the team after that. Later on in the same school year, he left the team voluntarily for personal reasons. 2 years later, actually in 2008, Chris died. And there were stories about his incident at the strip club and his leaving the football team that were written by members of the Cal Daily newspaper. It's, student journalism. They report on the happenings of members of the student body. And certainly Chris was a member of the student body. And as most newspapers and news organizations do, they keep an archive of those articles online. So if I wanted to search about Chris Pertz, I can type in Chris Pertz and up come a list of stories dealing with Chris Pertz, whether it's the negative ones, dealing with him getting, citation for a fight at the strip club, or positive ones, so maybe he won Scholar Athlete of the Week or something like that. So all of this information is available during archives. So after Chris died, his father and mother contacted the Cal Daily newspaper and said, we'd really like for you to take these articles offline. We don't want those articles to be available anymore, specifically the ones about the incident at the strip club and his leaving the football team. And the Cal Daily newspaper, as most upstanding newspapers would, those who are all about freedom of speech, said, no, we're not going to take them down. The only way we take down stories is if we would have to write a retraction for those stories. And since we wouldn't have to write a retraction for those stories, we're not taking them down. This didn't satisfy Harvey Pertz, and so he took them to small claims court, not specifically the newspaper, but specifically the editor-in-chief of the newspaper, who was, at the time the articles were written, he was still a senior in high school. So he took him to small claims court, and the judge, who was very sympathetic, we understand you're grieving for the loss of your son, but you, first of all, don't have standing to assert a right to force someone to take down articles, and really, the claim he had against the editor-in-chief was emotional distress. Those articles, or the availability of those articles, were not causing you any emotional distress. Now, it would seem like an emotional distress case would be no big deal, but it really wasn't that he was asserting emotional distress. He was really, in my opinion, asserting this right to erase certain information that is unfavorable about his son. And that's where you get this whole idea of the right to be forgotten. Now, closest thing we have is this EU consideration of the right to be forgotten, which many commentators are saying is going to pass really soon. So in 2010, began circulating a proposal, and talked about that earlier, for, I wouldn't say amendments, but strengthening their data privacy. And one of the strengthenings, or one of the enhancements would be to allow individuals to demand the deletion of personal information or personal data that was no longer being used for the purpose for which it was originally collected. So say I went on Amazon.com, I purchased the Hitman's Guide or something. And that was a while ago, and Amazon keeps sending me recommendations. Well, you bought the Hitman's Guide, you might like this. And I could, under a right to be forgotten, under a certain scheme, send a letter to, or contact Amazon and demand they erase my information, or remove that information from Amazon's possession. Now here's the thing, the way that personal data is defined is very broad. And so that could be problematic, because personal data could be anything that identifies you, or could possibly lead to your identification. So obvious things like your name would be pretty obvious. Your picture would be pretty obvious. But what about things like events that could possibly lead to someone identifying you? And my concern is, what does this mean for news gathering organizations and news publications, or I should say organizations who publish news or make information available to people? And the reason I say this concerns me is because there is an example, or a couple examples, in some of the countries of the European Union which are, should cause people to pause. One, in 2009, in Germany, a man who had been arrested and convicted of murder got out of jail. He sent Wikipedia a cease and desist letter saying, you need to remove from my Wikipedia page the fact that I killed somebody 13 years ago. And he was asserting that he had a right to force Wikipedia to remove this information. Now, most people would say, well, Wikipedia wouldn't do that, but if Wikipedia is following a certain right to be forgotten, and depending on how that right is administered, Wikipedia could face a case actually going to court and face having to erase that information, which in the US we would consider public information. But Wikipedia could possibly have to erase that. Now, there are exceptions and exemptions built into that right, into the proposed right to be forgotten, and one of those is for freedom of expression. But again, the question is, how are we going to define freedom of expression, and would it be on the same level that the US considers freedom of expression, which allows for a lot of different things? And so we come to US privacy law. Now, we don't have a right to be forgotten in the US now, and there's no legislative proposal that I know of going forth proposing a